I hate Floch Forster from Attack on Titan. So much so that I was laying in bed an hour or two after watching the latest episode, and a thought popped right into my head. God, I despise Floch. Every time he's on screen, I physically cringe. And while there are plenty of logical reasons to feel this way, I mean, I'm fairly certain you're supposed to hate him. The specific feeling I was experiencing was different than all of that. Like it was bothering a very certain part of my brain, like the back of it, and a bit to the right. Which is coincidentally where the brain receives signals from the eyes, although they say the reward system that triggers an appreciation for art rests right above the eyes themselves, but I digress. This is all to say that I don't necessarily hate Floch logically, rather I despise him aesthetically. Maybe it's his coconut head hairstyle, or his infuriating shit-eating grin, or even his name. It's probably his name actually, and it's strange to me because I can't really explain why. I watch anime based almost solely off of character design these days. I regularly scroll through Netflix, Hulu, Crunchyroll, or the artist formerly known as Funimation, but I rarely read the show's descriptions. Rather, I'll give an anime a shot if the single piece of cover art that the site uses appeals to my specific aesthetic sense. I say sense because I'm not sure I have a style I prefer over all the others, but I know there is a common denominator between all the designs I do happen to like. Rick and Morty is one of my favorite shows of all time. I also have not watched Rick and Morty Season 4, and I'm pretty sure there's a Season 5 that I also haven't watched. The reason for this is my disdain for the color green, or more specifically, the light green that drives the show's core aesthetic. I find myself almost unable to watch the show anymore. And when I tell you that I have almost no interest in catching up with the seasons, even though I think it's one of the best written shows I've ever seen, I promise I'm not lying. Maybe that's a bit strange for me. What certainly is strange, though, is that I'm a writer first and foremost, and yet I have this fixation on aesthetics. But I also don't find it strange at all, because writing is also aesthetics. Whenever I write poetry, I see the structure of the words themselves as a visual art piece. Completely separate, but also innately tied to the actual subjective interpretation anyone could have based on the words written on the page. If I wrote a poem about love, made it so the physical words on the page were formed in the shape of a frog, would the poem then be a love poem or a frog poem? I find it hard to say that any half of the art piece, the visual or the literary, takes precedence over the other. Honestly, since our eyes are what capture the words of love and the image of the frog, and since they both go to the same reward system portion at the front of our brain, I wouldn't disagree with someone if they told me that the two are basically the same. Both lead to abstract, non-physical interpretation anyway, so I believe that both be measured by their aesthetic appeal. I think we'll call this one The Princess and the Frog. Let's go even further. Why do we have an aesthetic sense at all? The only correct answer to me is that, when looked at from an evolutionary standpoint, is that we find things aesthetically pleasing when they can somehow benefit us. Food looks tasty. Is that not incredibly weird? How can something look like a taste? But it does. Because the brain knows it will keep us alive, and thus can make up a reason for us to want to consume it. Why do you think we have taste buds at all? Why does orgasming feel good? We don't do these things to survive, we do them for pleasure. And that potential for a pleasurable experience can be detected by our aesthetic sense. Bread is a pretty bland color in most cases, but it still looks really tasty. Meanwhile, carrots are literally orange. Orange! Yet I wouldn't say they look good, because bread has those simple sugars that our bodies need, yet can be often pretty difficult to find in the wild. Vegetables or vegetation as a whole, however, is much easier to come by. It's the same thing with anime, I think. My brain predetermines what shows I may enjoy based on the visible factors most efficiently and easily present. The cover picture, the aesthetic. It's all about cutting out the middleman, in this case the concept description, and making it as quick as possible of a decision. You know, in case a wild boar is coming to kill me or something. When you take this all into account, it makes complete sense why I would hate Floch right away. His aesthetic value is just not appealing to me for whatever reason. This is something we do with people all of the time, why we care about clothes, hair, makeup, or really looks at all. That first visual impression means so much because the brain is historically needed to make lightning fast decisions on whether a thing or other being can benefit it or if it could be a danger to it. Finding someone attractive at a first glance doesn't really make much sense until you remember that the brain has a validation system. It will find a person or parts of them attractive because it knows there is a specific benefit for interaction, which in the primal sense would be intercourse and for survival of the species. All of this is conveyed directly through their aesthetic or visual appeal. Of course, it's a bit more complicated than that nowadays, but foundationally, this is probably solar core. Aesthetics are the first impression. The first impression can determine your very emotional response towards a person or thing, even if logically it makes little sense. They could be the nicest person in the world, but you just can't get over those knee-length jean shorts they wore the first time you met them. Some part of you may always, even if only slightly, dislike them for just that. Or maybe I'm just completely wrong about this, as I only really had the idea that I hate Floch aesthetically. Started writing the script and, well, have honestly just been thinking as I'm writing. I'm pretty sure I'm right though, at least in my case, as I did base the entire identity of my channel off of one character, Asuka, a character I love so much based largely off of aesthetics. I also want to clarify that aesthetics are not even purely physical, but honestly I'm going to need more time to think on that one, and exactly why that is. I also want to make it clear that you should not base your impressions of someone based on how they look. It doesn't really matter when we do this with something like anime or food, but with people, well, that's a pretty slippery slope. I do believe we've evolved enough to move past this and can drive our opinions on others based more within logic, as not doing so has led to and tried to justify a lot of really shitty behavior, the most obvious being something like racism. Be better than that. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this little impromptu video, and as always, thank you for watching.